In the heart of ancient deserts, deep within forested kingdoms, across mighty rivers and highland plateaus, Africa's royal bloodlines once ruled empires that dazzled the world. These were no mere tribal chieftains. They were emperors, queens, and sultans who commanded armies, negotiated with foreign powers, built cities of gold, and shaped entire civilizations. From the golden courts of Mali to the stone palaces of Great Zimbabwe, their legacies remain carved in bronze, sung in epic poetry, and whispered through generations. Yet their stories are often untold, their greatness overlooked. Until now. Welcome to Words of Time, the place where forgotten histories come alive. In this video, we'll journey across the continent to uncover the rise and reign of Africa's most powerful dynasties. From the Sonic kings of ancient Ghana, to the queens of Nubia who defied Rome, to the sultans of the Swahili coast who ruled the Indian Ocean trade. Get ready to explore royal power, sacred authority, epic battles, legendary wealth, and timeless legacies that continue to shape the spirit of Africa today. Africa's royal history is a vast and intricate tapestry, woven over centuries by kingdoms and empires that rose and fell across a continent rich in culture, spirituality, innovation, and political complexity. Long before European colonization reshaped Africa's political geography and suppressed indigenous governance systems, powerful dynasties ruled with legitimacy drawn from religion, heritage, conquest, and commerce. These dynasties, some born in the deserts of West Africa, others among the highlands of Ethiopia or the forests of the Congo, governed sophisticated states that controlled regional and transcontinental trade routes, developed unique legal systems, built monumental architecture, and fostered both oral and written intellectual traditions. One of the most compelling aspects of African royal history is the role dynasties played in uniting diverse communities under common political and spiritual systems. From the Sonic kings of ancient Ghana to the Solomonic emperors of Ethiopia, royal bloodlines served as the backbone of state legitimacy. These lineages, often stretching back hundreds of years in oral traditions, linked rulers with sacred ancestors or divine origins, reinforcing their authority in the eyes of their people. In many societies, kingship was not just a political position, it was a sacred duty. Kings were mediators between the human and spiritual realms, and their well-being was considered directly tied to the prosperity of the land and people. Yet for much of the modern period, African governance before colonization has been widely misunderstood or misrepresented. Early colonial writings and European historians often dismissed Africa as a continent without history, projecting an image of a place ruled by chaos, tribal warfare, or despotic chiefs. This narrative was not only inaccurate, it was designed to justify the colonial project by portraying African societies as primitive and in need of European governance. In reality, many African kingdoms were far more centralized and politically advanced than their European contemporaries assumed. They had codes of law, tax systems, military organization, diplomatic corps, and bureaucracies. Dynasties were able to survive, thrive, and adapt to changing circumstances for centuries, showing resilience and vision often omitted from mainstream historical accounts. This rich royal history can be explored by examining key geographic regions: West Africa, Central Africa, East Africa, and Southern Africa. In West Africa, empires like Ghana, Mali, and Songhai rose to immense wealth and power, particularly due to their control over gold mines and Saharan trade routes. Dynasties like the Keita of Mali and the Askia of Songhai not only commanded armies and collected tribute, they also patronized Islam and learning, transforming cities like Timbuktu into centers of global scholarship. Forest kingdoms such as Benin and Oyo developed powerful political systems and unique artistic traditions, including the world-renowned Benin bronzes. In Central Africa, the Kingdom of Congo and the empires of Luba and Lunda maintained complex networks of governance and trade, some integrating Christianity through diplomatic contact with the Portuguese, while others maintained spiritual systems rooted in ancestral veneration. These kingdoms demonstrated immense adaptability, with dynasties navigating both internal succession struggles and external threats from European incursions and the transatlantic slave trade. East Africa offers a different but equally rich dynastic tradition. Ethiopia, through the Solomonic dynasty, maintained a Christian empire for over 700 years, tracing its rulers to the biblical union of King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. The Kingdom of Aksum, which preceded the Solomonic line, was one of the great powers of the ancient world, engaging in trade with Rome, Persia, and India. Along the Swahili coast, city-states like Kilwa and Mombasa emerged with rulers claiming Persian or Arab ancestry, blending African, Islamic, and Asian cultural influences. These sultanates flourished on trade in gold, ivory, and slaves, establishing maritime dynasties with connections across the Indian Ocean world. Southern Africa adds another layer of dynastic depth. Great Zimbabwe, with its massive stone structures and royal enclosures, was the center of a powerful kingdom tied to gold trade routes stretching to the coast. The Razwi and Matapa dynasties continued this legacy. Further south, the emergence of the Zulu kingdom under Shaka Zulu represents a more recent dynastic story, but one of tremendous significance. Shaka and his successors revolutionized military tactics and created a centralized state that challenged British and Boer expansion. These southern dynasties show that African kingship was dynamic and adapted to both local traditions and external pressures. To uncover and reconstruct this royal past, scholars and historians rely on a wide variety of sources. Oral histories remain a cornerstone, preserved by griots in West Africa or court historians in Ethiopia. These narratives, often passed down across dozens of generations, carry genealogies, epic poems, praise songs, and lessons on governance. While sometimes criticized for lack of precision, oral traditions contain valuable insight into how Africans saw themselves and their rulers. Another critical source is Islamic chronicles. With the spread of Islam across much of West and East Africa from the 8th century onward, African scholars began to write histories in Arabic. These include works by al-Bakri, Ibn Battuta, and Leo Africanus, who documented the splendor of courts in Mali and Songhai, as well as local Muslim historians like Ahmad Baba and Mahmud Kadi, who wrote the Tariq al-Sudan and Tariq al-Fatish. These chronicles are vital for reconstructing the reigns of kings, diplomatic relations, religious life, and social customs. European accounts, though often biased, also provide information, especially for later centuries. Portuguese missionaries and explorers recorded their impressions of kingdoms like Congo, Benin, and Ethiopia. Later colonial records, while often distorted, contain administrative data, maps, and royal lineages. Archaeological evidence is equally important, especially for ancient sites like Great Zimbabwe or Aksum, where stone ruins, burial sites, inscriptions, and artifacts provide physical proof of long-standing dynasties and trade networks. Together, these sources allow us to challenge outdated views of Africa and place its royal dynasties where they rightfully belong, among the world's great traditions of governance, innovation, and cultural achievement. As new research and public interest in African history grows, the legacy of these royal bloodlines continues to inspire not just scholars, but communities across the continent and the diaspora. They are a reminder that Africa's past is not one of silence or stagnation, but of kings, queens, empires, and ideas that shaped the world. In Africa, the concept of kingship was far more than a political arrangement. It was a deeply spiritual, symbolic, and communal institution. Kings were not merely rulers, they were mediators between the human world and the divine, the living and the ancestral. The idea of kingship as sacred and divinely sanctioned permeated across regions, cultures, and historical periods in Africa. From the rainmaking kings of southern Africa to the Christian emperors of Ethiopia and the Islamic sultans of the Swahili coast, kingship involved a unique fusion of governance, spirituality, and cultural identity. One of the foundational concepts in many African royal systems was divine kingship. The ruler was seen not just as a human leader, but as a being infused with supernatural power or divine favor. In ancient Egypt, the pharaoh was considered the earthly embodiment of the god Horus. This idea of divine kingship was echoed in various ways across sub-Saharan Africa. Among the Shilluk of the Sudan, the king, or Reth, was believed to embody the spirit of the first king, Nikang, and was responsible for maintaining harmony between the people and the cosmos. Similarly, in the kingdom of Buganda in modern-day Uganda, the Kabaka king was thought to be divinely appointed, and his person was sacred. Any physical harm to him was taboo and could bring disaster to the kingdom. In West Africa, rulers such as the Oba of Benin or the Olofin of Oyo were seen as sacred individuals whose well-being was directly connected to the fertility of the land and the success of the people. These leaders often lived in isolation from ordinary people and performed elaborate rituals to maintain cosmic balance. The idea was that the king's body symbolized the kingdom itself, his health reflected its prosperity, and his misfortune could be interpreted as a sign of impending calamity. Succession to kingship varied widely across African societies, but was often governed by a blend of lineage, spiritual signs, and political negotiation. Two major succession systems dominated: patrilineal and matrilineal. In patrilineal systems, descent and inheritance were traced through the father's line. This was common in many centralized states, such as the Kingdom of Congo or the Zulu Kingdom. The next ruler would typically be chosen from among the sons or brothers of the previous king, often resulting in intense rivalries and power struggles. Conversely, in matrilineal systems, succession passed through the mother's line, usually to a king's sister's son. This was practiced among the Akan of Ghana and the Bemba of Zambia. Matrilineal succession was based on the belief that maternal lineage was more certain, and it helped prevent dynastic conflict by creating a clear path of inheritance. However, this did not mean that women ruled, although they could hold influential roles as queen mothers, regents, or advisors. Matrilineal systems emphasized the queen mother's critical role in grooming the heir, managing palace affairs, and balancing the power of the king. Despite these succession patterns, kingship was not simply inherited. It had to be earned and confirmed through rituals, omens, or the approval of elders and councils. In many traditions, potential kings had to undergo spiritual initiation, prove their leadership qualities, and sometimes even be chosen by divine signs. In some Yoruba traditions, when an Oba died, the oracle would be consulted to identify the most spiritually favored successor among the eligible royal princes. Oral tradition played a central role in sustaining royal lineages and their legitimacy. In societies without a written script, griots, bards, and praise singers acted as custodians of history. These individuals memorized royal genealogies, epics, and historical events, passing them down from one generation to the next. For example, in the Mali Empire, griots preserved the story of Sundiata Keita, the empire's founder, in the Epic of Sanjata. This narrative not only recounted historical events, but also reinforced the spiritual and heroic qualities of the Keita lineage. Oral traditions were not static. They evolved with time, adapting to new political realities or reinforcing emerging ideologies. They played a powerful role in shaping public memory and reinforcing the sacredness of kingship. Through song, poetry, and performance, oral historians could elevate the status of a king, legitimize a controversial succession, or criticize poor leadership in coded language. Spiritual legitimacy was another cornerstone of African kingship. A king's right to rule was not just a matter of lineage. It had to be sanctioned by the ancestors and affirmed through ritual. In many cultures, the ancestors were believed to watch over the living and had the power to bless or curse a ruler. Therefore, kings maintained elaborate shrines, performed seasonal sacrifices, and conducted ceremonies to honor past rulers and foundational ancestors. Among the Asante of Ghana, the golden stool was not just a royal symbol. It was considered the soul of the Asante nation. It was believed to house the spirit of the entire people, not just the king, and it was never allowed to touch the ground. The Asantehene king ruled not by personal authority alone, but through his guardianship of this sacred stool. Similarly, in the kingdom of Dahomey, the king held regular festivals in which he honored past rulers with elaborate rituals and symbolic reenactments of their deeds. In Ethiopia, the Solomonic emperors derived their legitimacy from a written and widely accepted origin story, the Kabra Nagast, which claimed they were direct descendants of the biblical King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. This claim of divine ancestry placed Ethiopian kingship within the Judeo-Christian tradition and elevated the emperor to a near-messianic figure. The emperor was seen as both a political and religious leader, often closely allied with the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. The symbols of royalty across Africa were many and varied, but they all functioned to elevate the king above ordinary citizens and make his authority visible and tangible. Regalia such as crowns, staffs, swords, animal skins, and beaded garments often carried spiritual power. Among the Yoruba, the beaded crown of the Oba was considered so sacred that it covered the king's face and could not be seen by the public. The color, shape, and design of the regalia conveyed the king's lineage, authority, and spiritual protection. Architecture was another crucial symbol of kingship. Royal palaces were often constructed to reflect not only the king's wealth, but also the cosmological order of the universe. In the Kingdom of Benin, the royal palace was a sprawling complex filled with courtyards, bronze plaques, and sacred shrines. Its design mirrored the hierarchical structure of society and the spiritual universe. In Great Zimbabwe, the massive stone walls and enclosures were built without mortar and demonstrated both engineering sophistication and the ruler's ability to mobilize labor and resources. These structures, towering over the landscape, served as a visual reminder of royal authority. Royal titles also carried deep meaning and were carefully chosen to express spiritual power, lineage, and sovereignty. Furthermore, the ceremonial life of kingship was rich with symbolism. Coronations, funerals, and public rituals often involved music, dance, feasting, and sacrifice, all of which reinforced the king's central role in maintaining social and cosmic order. In some cases, the king was not allowed to die in public. He would be ritually disappeared, or said to have gone to the ancestors, to preserve the perception of eternal continuity. Despite the arrival of Islam, Christianity, and colonial powers, many African royal systems adapted rather than disappeared. Kings converted to new religions, but retained their sacred role within the community. Some adopted foreign titles, while preserving indigenous systems beneath the surface. Others fused Islamic or Christian theology with ancestral traditions, creating syncretic forms of divine kingship. Even in the face of colonization, some dynasties managed to survive as symbolic or cultural leaders, and their influence continues into the present. In modern times, although few African kings hold political power in the formal sense, their cultural significance remains strong. In countries like Nigeria, Uganda, South Africa, and Ghana, traditional rulers continue to serve as custodians of heritage, mediators in conflict, and symbols of community identity. Their palaces, rituals, and lineages continue to draw public respect, affirming the enduring power of Africa's sacred kingship. Thus, African kingship was and remains a multidimensional institution, spiritual, political, symbolic, and ancestral. It cannot be reduced to mere chieftaincy or despotic rule, as often portrayed in outdated colonial narratives. Instead, it reflects a nuanced understanding of leadership, rooted in the belief that rulership must serve the people, honor the past, and maintain harmony with the divine. The sacred symbols, oral traditions, and spiritual foundations that shaped African kingship over centuries remain testaments to the continent's rich and complex history. Long before the rise of Mali and Songhai, the Ghana Empire stood as the first major political and economic power in West Africa. Known to its own people as Ouagadougou and ruled by the Sonic people, Ghana flourished between the 6th and 13th centuries CE in what is today southeastern Mauritania and western Mali. The empire did not border the modern country of Ghana. It received that name from colonial historians who mistakenly believed the two were related. Nevertheless, the Empire of Ghana laid the foundation for future Sahelian kingdoms, especially in terms of trade, governance, and religious diversity. The Sonic, a Mande-speaking people, founded the Ouagadougou dynasty that ruled Ghana for several centuries. According to oral tradition, the dynasty began with Dinga Cisse, a semi-legendary figure believed to possess divine or magical powers. His descendants established a centralized monarchy that would dominate trans-Saharan commerce and command loyalty from neighboring chieftains. The empire's success was tied to its geography. Situated between the resource-rich forests of the south and the Sahara Desert to the north, Ghana became a vital hub in the gold and salt trade. By around 800 CE, Ghana had emerged as a dominant force in the region. Its capital city, Kumbi-Sala, evolved into a dual city, one inhabited by the king and his court, and the other by Muslim merchants and scholars. The king of Ghana controlled all trade entering and exiting his territory. Gold dust, mined from the forests to the south, passed through Ghana en route to North Africa and the Mediterranean world. Salt, essential for preserving food and maintaining health, came from mines in Tagaza and Olol in the Sahara and moved southward. Ghana's rulers taxed every caravan that entered or left their territory, collecting tolls in gold, livestock, and goods. The empire's control of trade routes and strategic taxation made its kings immensely wealthy. Arab historians like al-Bakri, who wrote in the 11th century, marveled at the gold-laden splendor of the Ghanaian court. Al-Bakri described the king as sitting in state, surrounded by dogs adorned with gold collars, under a canopy held by staff-bearers and drummers. The king wore fine clothing, gold jewelry, and was revered not only as a political leader, but also as a religious figurehead. Though many merchants and elites were Muslim, the king himself initially maintained traditional Sonic religious practices centered on ancestor worship and sacred rituals. Government in Ghana was highly centralized. The king was advised by a royal council made up of clan leaders, elders, and military commanders. This council helped manage internal affairs, military campaigns, tax collection, and succession. The kingdom was divided into provinces, each governed by a local ruler who paid tribute and supplied soldiers to the central government. Ghana also maintained a standing army to protect its trade routes and territory. The military could mobilize tens of thousands of warriors if needed, which discouraged external aggression and internal rebellion. While Ghana thrived for centuries, its decline began in the late 11th century. One major factor was the shifting trade routes. As caravans began to favor more easterly paths, toward Mali and Gao, Ghana's strategic importance lessened. Another issue was environmental. Overgrazing and desertification may have undermined the agricultural productivity of the region. But perhaps the most critical blow came from external military pressure. In 1076, the Almoravids, a North African Berber Muslim movement, launched an invasion of Ghana. They temporarily captured Kumbi Sala and disrupted the empire's stability, although they did not remain in control for long. The Almoravid incursion also introduced more direct Islamic influence into the region, which likely created internal tensions between Muslim merchants and traditional Sonic elites. Over time, local vassals began asserting independence. The gold fields to the south came under the control of emerging powers, especially the rising Keita dynasty of Mali. By the early 13th century, Ghana had ceased to exist as an empire, reduced to a cluster of small chiefdoms. Yet Ghana's legacy was profound. It set the model for imperial structure in West Africa. Centralized monarchy, bureaucratic governance, wealth based on trade, and coexistence between Islam and indigenous traditions. The empire demonstrated that African polities could be both economically powerful and politically sophisticated long before European involvement. Ghana laid the groundwork upon which Mali and later Songhai would build their own empires, and it remains a crucial part of the West African historical consciousness. The rise of the Mali Empire marked one of the most celebrated eras in African history. Founded in the early 13th century, Mali emerged as a powerful successor to the Ghana Empire, and under the leadership of the Keita dynasty, it expanded to become one of the largest and wealthiest empires in the world at its peak. Mali combined commercial success, strong administration, religious influence, and cultural brilliance, especially in cities like Timbuktu, Djinn, and Niamey. The story of Mali is inseparable from two legendary figures, Sundiata Keita, the empire's founder, and Mansa Musa, whose pilgrimage to Mecca in the 14th century shocked the Islamic world. The origins of Mali are traced back to the Mandinka people, a subgroup of the Mande-speaking peoples who lived in the savanna south of the old Ghana Empire. Oral traditions preserved by griots, storytellers, and historians tell the story of Sundiata Keita, a disabled child who overcame exile, political intrigue, and spiritual battles to defeat the Sasso king Semanguru Kanti at the Battle of Karina around the year 1235 CE. Sundiata's victory is considered the founding moment of the Mali Empire. He unified the Mandinka clans, established a capital at Niamey, and created a constitution-like charter known as the Kurukan Fuga, emphasizing justice, clan balance, and the rights of the people. Though the details of the Epic of Sundiata are partly mythical, the historical reality is that Mali expanded rapidly under his leadership. He consolidated control over the gold-producing regions of Bambuk and Bure, and extended Mali's influence over former Ghanaian territories. Sundiata established a federal system of governance. Local rulers, often kings of their own territories, were allowed to remain in power as long as they pledged loyalty to the emperor and paid tribute. These rulers, called famas, were supervised by imperial envoys and military garrisons, ensuring that rebellion was difficult. Sundiata's successors continued to build the empire's power, but none would reach the fame or wealth of Mansa Musa, who ruled from 1312 to 1337 CE. Under Mansa Musa, Mali reached its territorial and cultural zenith. The empire stretched from the Atlantic Ocean in the west to the city of Gao in the east, and from the Saharan salt mines in the north to the forest fringes in the south. Mansa Musa's control of gold made Mali the economic powerhouse of the Islamic world. Mansa Musa's pilgrimage to Mecca in 1324 was a turning point in global perceptions of West Africa. Traveling with an entourage of thousands of attendants, including soldiers, officials, musicians, and slaves, he reportedly carried over 100 camel loads of gold. His generous almsgiving in cities like Cairo and Medina disrupted local economies and devalued gold for years. The pilgrimage not only demonstrated his piety, but also his immense wealth and power. It made Mali famous across the Islamic world, leading to its depiction on European maps, such as the Catalan Atlas of 1337, where Mansa Musa is shown holding a golden orb. Beyond symbolism, the pilgrimage had lasting diplomatic and intellectual effects. Mansa Musa established diplomatic relations with North African and Middle Eastern states and brought back architects, scholars, and administrators. Among them was Abu Ishaq al-Sahili, a poet and architect from Granada, who is credited with designing several monumental buildings in Mali, including the famous Djinguereber Mosque in Timbuktu. These connections strengthened Mali's integration into the Islamic world and helped develop Timbuktu into a renowned center of learning. Islam played a major role in Mali's administration and diplomacy, but it coexisted with indigenous African religious practices. The ruling elite, particularly the Keita dynasty, were mostly Muslim by the 14th century. Islamic law, or Sharia, influenced the justice system, especially in urban centers. Judges or qadis were appointed in large cities, and Islamic scholars advised the court. However, Mali never imposed Islam on its diverse population. Most rural communities retained animist traditions and festivals, ancestral rituals, and secret societies remained active. This religious pluralism allowed the empire to maintain unity across its vast and diverse territory. Administratively, Mali was highly organized. The empire was divided into provinces, each ruled by a governor appointed by the emperor. These governors managed taxation, law enforcement, and military conscription. The empire had a standing army and garrison troops stationed throughout key regions. Tribute from provinces was collected in the form of gold, grain, livestock, and labor. The central government at Niani maintained detailed records, often through oral accounts memorized by griots and administrators. A key official was the Farba, a royal agent who oversaw the collection of tribute and reported to the emperor. The economy of Mali was centered on trans-Saharan trade, particularly in gold, salt, ivory, slaves, and kola nuts. Gold remained Mali's principal export, with mines in Ouangara, Bambuk, and Bouré supplying nearly half of the known gold in the Old World during the 14th century. Salt, mined in the Sahara and carried by camel caravans, was exchanged for gold and food. Mali's location allowed it to dominate this trade, collecting taxes at strategic crossings like Walata and Tadmeka. The city of Djen, situated at the confluence of river and caravan routes, was a bustling commercial hub, where goods from the savanna, forest, and desert zones met. Mali was also a center of intellectual and religious life, especially in cities like Timbuktu, which became a major center of Islamic scholarship. The Sankore University, along with its sister institutions and libraries, attracted scholars from North Africa and the Middle East. Manuscripts on law, astronomy, medicine, philosophy, and theology were written, copied, and preserved. At its height, Timbuktu was said to hold over 400,000 manuscripts, making it one of the most literate cities in Africa. Literacy in Arabic spread among the elite, and Mali's scholars participated in theological and legal debates with peers from Cairo, Fez, and Mecca. Despite its greatness, Mali's decline began in the late 14th and 15th centuries. Several factors contributed: internal succession crises, overextension of territory, and the rise of rival states. After the death of Mansa Musa, his successors were unable to maintain the same level of unity and control. Provinces such as Gao grew more autonomous. Rebellions became common, and local rulers withheld tribute or declared independence. The vital gold fields of Ouangara fell outside of Mali's control by the mid-15th century. One of the major threats to Mali's stability came from the Songhai people, based in the eastern city of Gao. Once a vassal state of Mali, Songhai rebelled and asserted its independence under powerful leaders such as Sunni Ali. By the end of the 15th century, the Songhai Empire would absorb much of Mali's eastern territory and become the dominant power in the Sahel. Nonetheless, the Keita dynasty and the Mali Empire left a monumental legacy. The political institutions, trade networks, and cultural accomplishments of Mali shaped the Sahel for centuries. The empire demonstrated the possibility of wealth, knowledge, and political complexity in sub-Saharan Africa. Its monuments, manuscripts, and oral histories remain treasured by scholars and descendants alike. The Songhai Empire emerged as the final and most expansive of the great medieval West African empires, following the decline of Mali. Rooted in the ancient city of Gao along the Middle Niger River, Songhai rose to power in the 15th century and reached its golden age in the 16th century under the leadership of the Askia dynasty. With a highly organized administration, a strong military, and a deep engagement with Islam, Songhai became a model of imperial governance and religious scholarship. Its strategic control of trade routes and riverine systems, especially along the Niger, allowed it to dominate commerce and regional politics. The roots of Songhai power go back centuries before the empire's rise. Gao had been an important trading center as early as the 9th century CE, thriving under local rulers who initially served as vassals to Ghana and later to Mali. Over time, however, Gao grew wealthy and powerful enough to assert its independence. In the mid-15th century, Songhai's fortunes changed dramatically under the leadership of Sunni Ali, a military genius and charismatic leader who reigned from circa 1464 to 1492. Sunni Ali transformed Songhai from a regional kingdom into a mighty empire through ruthless warfare and calculated expansion. He conquered important cities such as Timbuktu in 1468 and Jen in 1475, both of which had been vital intellectual and commercial centers under Mali. Sunni Ali maintained control over these cities by stationing military garrisons and suppressing resistance from Muslim scholars and elites who had ties to Mali's Islamic traditions. His rule was characterized by religious pragmatism. He protected Muslim institutions but did not govern according to Islamic law. Sunni Ali also respected traditional African religious practices, which helped him secure loyalty from rural populations. To consolidate his control, Sunni Ali built a powerful navy on the Niger River, using war canoes to assert dominance over riverine cities and ensure smooth transportation of troops and goods. This naval power allowed Songhai to control internal trade routes and tax commerce efficiently. His military campaigns expanded the empire westward to the borders of modern-day Mali, eastward toward Hausaland, and deep into the Niger Bend, creating a unified state larger than any previous West African empire. After Sunni Ali's death in 1492, his son, Sunni Baru, briefly assumed power, but was quickly challenged by one of his father's generals, Muhammad Tur, later known as Askia Muhammad I. In 1493, Askia Muhammad overthrew Baru in a bloodless coup, claiming that Sunni Baru was unfit to rule due to his neglect of Islamic practices. Thus began the Askia dynasty, which introduced sweeping reforms to bring Islamic governance to the forefront of statecraft in Songhai. Askia Muhammad I ruled from 1493 to 1528, and under his leadership, Songhai reached the height of its power and administration. A devout Muslim, Askia undertook a grand pilgrimage to Mecca in 1496, similar to Mansa Musa's famous journey. Along the way, he forged diplomatic relations with the Ottoman Empire, Egypt, and other Islamic centers. He returned with scholars, judges, and advisors who helped reorganize the empire according to Islamic principles. Askia Muhammad established a bureaucratic government with clearly defined departments for the military, treasury, justice, agriculture, and internal affairs. He divided the empire into provinces, each governed by a governor, Kurmanafari, responsible for collecting taxes and maintaining order. These officials were usually chosen based on merit rather than lineage. He also appointed qadis, Islamic judges, to preside over legal matters in cities, especially where Islamic law held sway. Education and scholarship flourished under Askia's rule. Cities like Timbuktu, Jen, and Gao became renowned for their Islamic universities, libraries, and manuscript production. Timbuktu in particular rivaled centers of learning in Cairo and Baghdad, drawing scholars from all over the Islamic world. Thousands of manuscripts were written and preserved on topics such as astronomy, law, medicine, and theology. Arabic became the language of administration and scholarship, though local languages remained in use for oral communication. Despite his success, Askia Muhammad was deposed by his own sons in a palace coup in 1528, initiating a period of dynastic struggle. Although his descendants, the Askia dynasty, continued to rule for decades, internal divisions gradually weakened the state. Nevertheless, the central authority maintained trade and governance through much of the 16th century, with cities like Kano, Katsina, and Agadez playing vital roles in linking Songhai with the Sahara and beyond. The beginning of the end for the Songhai Empire came in 1591, when the Moroccan Sultan Ahmad al-Mansur launched an ambitious military campaign to seize control of West Africa's gold trade. A Moroccan army, equipped with firearms and cannons, crossed the Sahara and defeated Songhai's forces at the Battle of Tondabai. The Songhai soldiers, although numerous and brave, were ill-equipped against gunpowder weapons. The Moroccan invasion marked the collapse of centralized authority, although pockets of resistance and semi-independent provinces persisted for some time. After 1591, the Songhai Empire fragmented. Timbuktu, Gao, and Jen fell into decline as trans-Saharan trade routes shifted and the Atlantic trade rose in importance. While Morocco never fully controlled the interior of West Africa, its invasion shattered Songhai's political structure and economic supremacy. Nevertheless, the legacy of Songhai endures in the region's cultural memory. Songhai's governance, religious life, and military strategy left an indelible mark on West African history. It represented the height of Islamic statecraft in the Sahel and proved that large, complex empires could thrive in sub-Saharan Africa with sophisticated administration and cultural institutions. The empire's blend of local traditions and Islamic reforms made it a unique experiment in pluralistic rule. Its achievements in trade, education, and governance rivaled those of any empire in the early modern world. The Kingdom of Oyo was one of the most powerful and sophisticated forest empires in pre-colonial West Africa. Emerging among the Yoruba-speaking people, it established a long-lasting political and cultural legacy that endured for centuries. The Yoruba trace their origins to a divine ancestor named Oduduwa, who, according to tradition, descended from the heavens and founded the city of Ile-Ife. Oduduwa is considered the progenitor of all Yoruba kings, and the connection to him became central to the political legitimacy of ruling families across Yoruba land, including in Oyo. The leadership of the Oyo Empire was built on the concept of sacred kingship. The ruler, known as the Olophan of Oyo, was not only a political figure, but also a spiritual intermediary between the people and the gods. His authority was viewed as divinely sanctioned, inherited through lineage linked to Oduduwa. The Olophan ruled from the capital city of Oyo, sometimes called Old Oyo, which was located in the savanna region north of the tropical forests. This location allowed the kingdom to maintain strong agricultural production while also facilitating military expansion using cavalry. The political structure of Oyo was carefully balanced between centralized power and institutional checks. While the Olophan wielded immense authority, his decisions were subject to the influence of the Oyo Messi, a council of 7 powerful noblemen. This council acted as both advisors and a counterweight to royal power. The head of the Oyo Messi, called the Basharan, held particular sway and had the authority to initiate the deposition of an Olophan deemed unfit or tyrannical. If the Oyo Messi rejected the Olophan's rule, they would send him a symbolic message, an empty calabash or parrot's eggs, urging him to commit ritual suicide, which was a cultural mechanism for maintaining accountability at the highest level. Oyo's success was tied closely to its military prowess. Unlike many other forest states, Oyo developed a cavalry-based army, thanks to its geographical position near the northern savanna. Horses were imported through trade networks extending into the Hausa states and beyond the Niger River. This allowed Oyo to dominate neighboring polities, including the Borgu states to the west and the Nupe to the northeast. The use of cavalry gave Oyo the ability to launch swift raids, enforce tribute collection, and control long-distance trade routes. At its peak in the 17th and 18th centuries, the Oyo Empire expanded its territory across a vast area, including parts of modern-day Nigeria, Benin, and Togo. The empire was divided into provinces administered by local governors called agiles, who acted on behalf of the Olophan. In key strategic towns, representatives known as Ilari were appointed to monitor local affairs and report back to the central government. These agents also collected taxes in the form of goods, labor, and sometimes captives. Oyo's economy was diverse and highly commercial. It benefited from trade routes linking the forest to the savanna and the coastal regions. Local markets thrived in cities like Oyo Isle, and long-distance traders, including Hausa and Muslim merchants, brought goods such as salt, textiles, leather, and horses. The Yoruba themselves produced agricultural products like yam, kola nuts, and palm oil, which were exchanged regionally. By the 18th century, the kingdom became increasingly involved in the Atlantic slave trade. Oyo conducted slave raids into weaker neighboring territories and sold captives to European merchants operating along the coast, especially in the ports of Badagry, Porto Novo, and Lagos. Enslaved people were transported from the interior to these ports and sold in exchange for firearms, cloth, iron, alcohol, and other goods. The increased flow of weapons and wealth further empowered the Oyo elite, but it also sowed the seeds of instability. The growing reliance on slavery had both economic and social consequences. While it enriched the ruling class and reinforced Oyo's military dominance, it destabilized border regions and escalated internal rivalries. Factions within the royal court competed for influence, and ambitious provincial leaders occasionally resisted central authority. Moreover, the structure of power that had previously balanced the Olofin and the Oyo Messi began to fracture, particularly in the late 18th century. By the early 19th century, Oyo's fortunes began to wane. Several factors contributed to its decline. One was the increasing militarization of rival Yoruba states and factions, some of which challenged Oyo's dominance. Another was the rising strength of the Fulani-led Islamic jihads to the north, especially the establishment of the Sokoto Caliphate, which disrupted trade networks and regional stability. Internally, palace intrigues and succession disputes weakened the authority of the Olofin. The Oyo Messi at times exercised their veto power with destructive results, leading to periods of civil war and assassinations. Eventually, the central government could no longer enforce its will over distant provinces. By the 1830s, many vassal states declared independence or fell under the control of rival kingdoms. The capital city of Oyo Isle was abandoned due to conflict and relocated further south to Ago Oyo, marking the symbolic end of the classical empire. Though remnants of the kingdom persisted and the title of Olofin continued to carry cultural weight, the political power of the empire had effectively collapsed. Despite its fall, the legacy of the Oyo Empire endures in Yoruba political thought, religion, and culture. The institutional balance between sacred kingship and checks on power, the military innovations, and the complex integration of trade, warfare, and diplomacy have all left lasting marks. The Yoruba chieftaincy system today, including in cities like Ibadan and Ogbomoso, reflects structures first formalized under Oyo rule. Oral histories, praise poetry, and ceremonial traditions preserve the memory of Olofins and warriors who shaped West African history. The Benin Kingdom, located in present-day southern Nigeria, was one of the most enduring and artistically distinguished monarchies in African history. Founded over 1,000 years ago, the kingdom is best known for its centralized governance, impressive art traditions, and extensive foreign diplomacy. The origins of Benin's royal dynasty are deeply intertwined with myth, religion, and the migration of cultural ideas. According to oral tradition, the first ruler of Benin with divine legitimacy was Yuka I, believed to have ascended the throne in the 13th century. Yuka was the son of a Yoruba prince from Ife and a native Benin mother, thus linking Benin's monarchy with the spiritual and cultural authority of Oduduwa, the legendary progenitor of Yoruba civilization. Before Yuka's reign, the Edo-speaking people of the region were ruled by a council of elders and village leaders under a loose confederation known as the Ajiso dynasty. This earlier system eventually proved unstable, leading the people to seek a ruler with divine lineage from the Yoruba heartland. The arrival of Aramian, a prince from Isle Ife, and the eventual enthronement of his son, Yuka, symbolized a shift from diffuse authority to centralized monarchy. The new dynasty, later known as the Oba dynasty, built a political system that combined sacred kingship with highly structured administration. The king of Benin was known as the Oba, a title that denoted supreme authority in both spiritual and political matters. The Oba was believed to be the living embodiment of the divine and was treated with profound reverence. Once crowned, he was considered too sacred to be seen eating, sleeping, or dying. His presence alone was believed to bless the land and ensure prosperity for the kingdom. Rituals performed at the royal palace reinforced this divine status, while the annual Igu festival was held to renew the king's spiritual power. Beneath the Oba, Benin's political system relied on a network of titled chiefs, guilds, and palace functionaries who managed various aspects of governance, trade, religion, and military affairs. Chief among these were the Uzama, a group of hereditary nobles who acted as kingmakers. They were responsible for selecting and crowning a new Oba upon the death of a predecessor, though the choice typically followed a clear patrilineal line. In addition, palace chiefs, known as the Agivbo, played critical roles in daily administration. This structure allowed for continuity and control over a sprawling, diverse territory that extended westward to the Lagos region, eastward into parts of the Niger Delta, and southward toward the Atlantic Ocean. Benin City, the capital, became a marvel of urban planning and architecture. The royal palace, which stood at the heart of the city, was an expansive complex featuring courtyards, shrines, sculpted gates, and ceremonial halls. Surrounding the capital was an intricate system of walls and moats, collectively referred to as the Benin earthworks. These defensive structures, which may have been constructed as early as the 8th century and expanded in later periods, were among the largest man-made fortifications in the world. Archaeological estimates suggest that more than 16,000 kilometers of earthen banks and ditches were built to protect and delineate the kingdom's territory. Art and visual culture played a central role in the assertion of royal authority in Benin. Perhaps the most renowned expression of this was the casting of bronze plaques and sculptures, many of which adorned the royal palace. These artworks were produced by guilds of specialized artisans under royal patronage, particularly the Iganaramwin Guild, which was responsible for brass and bronze work. The plaques often depicted scenes of court life, royal ceremonies, warfare, and foreign diplomacy. Through their symbolism, these artworks reinforced the sacred status of the Oba and the hierarchical order of the kingdom. Ivory carving was also highly developed. Elaborate ivory tusks, decorated with historical and religious motifs, were used in palace altars dedicated to past Obas. Coral beads, another important medium, were worn by the Oba and high-ranking chiefs to signify status and spiritual protection. The use of regalia such as beaded crowns, scepters, and ceremonial swords further emphasized the royal identity. Every artistic object in Benin had political, religious, and historical significance, serving as both a cultural artifact and a tool of governance. Benin's diplomatic history is equally significant. From the late 15th century onward, the kingdom maintained extensive relations with European powers, beginning with the arrival of Portuguese explorers in the 1470s. The Portuguese were impressed by the organization and sophistication of Benin and established trade links with the royal court. The kingdom exported pepper, ivory, textiles, and slaves in exchange for firearms, metals, horses, and luxury goods. European visitors often remarked on the grandeur of Benin City, describing its wide streets, organized markets, and the cleanliness and discipline of its inhabitants. Over time, Benin diversified its foreign contacts. By the 16th century, Dutch, British, and French traders had entered the region, further integrating Benin into the Atlantic economic system. Unlike some African states that quickly became dependent on the slave trade, Benin maintained greater control over its foreign policy and trade terms. The Oba carefully regulated the export of slaves, often limiting it in favor of other goods. This cautious approach allowed the kingdom to preserve internal stability longer than some of its neighbors. However, in the 18th and 19th centuries, the kingdom faced growing internal and external pressures. Succession disputes weakened central authority, and rising European demand for slaves intensified conflict in surrounding regions. Benin's gradual decline was accelerated by the aggressive expansion of British colonial interests in the Niger Delta during the second half of the 19th century. Tensions between Benin and British merchants and officials escalated, especially as Britain sought to open the interior to free trade and suppress what it viewed as restrictive native customs. The final confrontation came in 1897. After a failed diplomatic mission by British officials, some of whom were killed en route to Benin, the British launched a full-scale punitive expedition. The invading force, numbering over 1,000 soldiers, burned Benin City to the ground, looted the royal palace, and exiled Oba Ovenramwin to Calabar, where he died in 1914. The destruction of Benin was one of the most symbolic acts of imperial conquest in Africa. Thousands of Benin bronzes and artifacts were seized and transported to Europe, where they were distributed to museums in London, Berlin, Vienna, and other cities. The looting of Benin's cultural treasures has remained a subject of international controversy for over 100 years. In recent decades, there have been sustained calls for the restitution of these artifacts to Nigeria, with some institutions beginning to return pieces. Despite the devastation of 1897, the cultural memory of Benin has not disappeared. The royal lineage continues, with the current Oba serving in a traditional and symbolic capacity. Cultural festivals, oral histories, and contemporary art all help preserve the legacy of this once mighty kingdom. The Benin Kingdom's achievements in governance, urban planning, diplomacy, and artistic production make it one of the most remarkable civilizations in African history. Its emphasis on divine kingship, complex administrative systems, and visual symbols of power reflect a level of political sophistication that rivals any pre-modern state. Moreover, the kingdom's ability to manage long-term relationships with foreign powers, while preserving internal autonomy for centuries, speaks to the strategic acumen of its rulers. In the cultural and historical imagination of the Edo people and the wider world, Benin remains a symbol of African creativity, resilience, and statecraft. The Kingdom of Congo emerged in the late 14th century, centered in the fertile basin of the Congo River. Its origins lie with the Lakini dynasty, named after Lakini Luanini, the semi-legendary founder who consolidated smaller chiefdoms around the valley. He established the capital at Mbanza, Congo, later called São Salvador, which would become the spiritual, political, and economic heart of one of Central Africa's most influential pre-colonial states. Under the Lakini line, Congo grew from a local chiefdom into a centralized monarchy, with clear succession, territorial control, and expanding influence over modern-day northern Angola, southern Congo, and Western Democratic Republic of the Congo. The conversion of Congo to Christianity in the late 15th century marked a defining chapter in the kingdom's history. In 1483, the monarch Nzinga Nkowu received baptism at the hands of Portuguese missionaries, adopting the name João I. His son, Afonso I, took the Christian path further, establishing strong links with Portugal. He corresponded with King Manuel I of Portugal, invited priests and scribes, and encouraged literacy in Latin and Portuguese. Under Afonso's reign, schools were created for Congo's nobility, churches were built across the kingdom, and laws were codified in Christian style. The adoption of Christianity provided the monarchy with enhanced symbolic legitimacy and placed Congo within the broader Christian realm, allowing it to participate in international diplomacy, trade negotiations, and intellectual exchange. The King of Congo, known as the Mani Congo, became the central figure in both spiritual and worldly matters. The Mani Congo supervised trade, controlled courts of law, and maintained diplomatic connections stretching across the Atlantic. Foreign merchants, especially Portuguese, traded copper, ivory, cloth, and slaves. Congo sent exports of ivory and copper to Europe, receiving firearms, silk, wine, and beadwork in return. Portuguese influence led to the introduction of new crops, like maize and cassava, which would transform agriculture in the region. The Mani Congo also embarked on missions to establish diplomatic relations with European monarchs, securing recognition of Congo's sovereignty and territorial integrity. Despite its early success, Congo faced growing internal and external pressures by the early 17th century. The increasing demand for slaves began to trouble existing institutions and power balances. Provincial governors, or Mani provinces, gained wealth and influence through trading activities tied to the Atlantic network. Tensions escalated, leading to civil wars in the 1600s, notably the Battle of Mbuila in 1615, where the king's army was defeated by the Portuguese. The Mani Congo was killed in battle, throwing the kingdom into turmoil. Rival claimants to the throne emerged, each backed by Portuguese interests, destabilizing central authority. These wars lasted for decades, severely weakening royal control and fracturing the kingdom between competing factions. One notable internal challenge to established authority was the Antonian movement, founded in 1700 and won by a woman named Dona Beatriz Quimpavida. Declaring herself possessed by Saint Anthony, she preached a vision of restored unity and indigenous control of Christianity. She urged that the Mani Congo remain one single Christian kingdom, free from Portuguese domination. Although popular among the masses and some nobles, her movement was condemned by the church and the elite. She was arrested, tried for heresy, and executed in 1702. Nevertheless, her followers continued resistance, demonstrating the depths of anti-colonial sentiment and cultural resistance within Congo. Despite these efforts, the kingdom could not recover full sovereignty. By the early 19th century, fragmented polities persisted, but increasing pressure from Portuguese expansionism and the slave trade undermined stability. European colonial interests gradually converted Congo into a supplier of slaves and resources, then into a protectorate, and eventually into a colony by the late 190th century. The Lubumbashi and others fell under colonial administration. The monarchy lost its political power, though a few claimants survived in ceremonial roles. The legacy of the Lekini dynasty is visible today in cultural memory, oral histories, and descendants who claim ancestral authority. In the central regions of Central Africa, the Luba and Lunda empires developed parallel systems of divine kingship, social hierarchy, and cultural production. In the heart of modern-day southeastern Congo, the Balapwi dynasties exemplified sacred monarchy. According to tradition, Luba kings possessed spiritual power derived from mythical ancestors, known as Kalala Alunga, considered both human and supernatural. Each new king had to prove his worthiness through ritual, demonstrating possession of mystical authority that ensured the protection and vitality of the realm. Luba kingship was intensely ritualized. Coronation ceremonies included trials, animal sacrifices, and ritual consumption of sacred substances to confirm divine election. Kings made pilgrimages to sacred groves and maintained shrines in the capital. Their spiritual role extended into social and economic spheres. They mediated disputes, appointed officials, resolved territorial disputes, and oversaw rituals marking agricultural cycles. All this affirmed their legitimacy and sustainability. Political ideology in both Luba and Lunda realms fused sacred kingship with administrative order. In Luba, the Mulapwi king ruled with the help of a council of clan leaders and royally appointed officials. The state was organized into provinces overseen by semi-autonomous chiefs. The king's palace was a central ritual and administrative site where local leaders gathered. His authority was symbolically represented by regalia, clubs, scepters, cowrie-adorned garments, and stools believed to embody the spirits of ancestors. Ceremonies emphasized that the Mulapwi was the center of the cosmos, a living link between the spiritual and temporal realms. Marriage alliances played a strategic role in expansion. Kings married daughters from local clans and foreign principalities to secure loyalty and expand influence. In Lunda, the king assumed the title Mwada Yambo, ruling from a capital near modern Katenda. Through royal marriages, Lunda kings incorporated new territories and legitimized rulership over conquered peoples. A chief from Luba might be wed into Lunda royalty to confirm status, and vice versa. These alliances fostered political unity, cultural exchange, and the integration of diverse groups under a shared ideology of divine rulership. Trade networks flourished under these kingdoms. The Luba Empire, for example, controlled iron, salt, copper, raffia cloth, and food staples, trading them through river routes to Lunda and beyond. Artisans produced highly regarded masks, ritual objects, and utilitarian items reflecting cosmological beliefs. These served both religious purposes and diplomatic exchange. Lunda, meanwhile, exploited its position on routes connecting the Congo Basin to the Indian Ocean trade. They exchanged rubber, ivory, enslaved labor, and forest products for beads, cloth, metal goods, and weapons. Artistic production under both empires was profoundly tied to sacred authority. In Luba, woodcarving was central. Kings wielded carved headrests shaped like hunched figures. Stools were carved to symbolize ancestral seats of power. The female figure known as the maternity stool symbolized fertility, wisdom, and continuation of lineage. Masks, carved paddles, and divination objects were governed by priests in secret societies, reinforcing the link between kingship and spiritual potency. Decline in Luba and Lunda came gradually. They faced pressure from trade disruptions, environmental shifts, and the encroachment of European colonial interests. By the late 19th century, Lunda had fractured into smaller polities under Belgian and Portuguese colonial domination. Luba too experienced internal strife and colonial interference. Yet despite colonial disruption, both dynastic traditions have persisted. Chiefs and kings still play ceremonial and cultural roles, and Luba woodcarvers continue to create ritual objects informed by centuries-old styles. These kingdoms illustrate how sacred kingship, marriage diplomacy, trade integration, and artistic expression sustained centralized states in the heart of Africa, simultaneously political, spiritual, and creative in ways that reshaped regional dynamics. The Kingdom of Aksum emerged around the end of the 1st century CE in the highlands of what is now northern Ethiopia and Eritrea, becoming one of Africa's earliest great empires. Strategically positioned near the Red Sea coast and commanding routes connecting Africa, Arabia, and the Indian Ocean, Aksum leveraged its geography to become a preeminent trading power. Its port at Adulis served as a hub where merchants from Rome, Egypt, Byzantium, Persia, India, and Arabia exchanged ivory, gold, frankincense, myrrh, exotic animals, and agricultural products for textiles, metals, glassware, wine, and olive oil. Aksum's rulers adopted coinage in the 3rd century CE, becoming one of the few African polities to mint their own gold, silver, and bronze coins. These coins were inscribed in Guizi and sometimes Greek, echoing Mediterranean models, and featured royal portraits and symbols of divinity. The appearance of crosses on coins minted during the rule of King Ezana marked the integration of Christianity into royal imagery and underscored the state's spiritual authority. Under King Ezana's reign, dating roughly from the 320s to the mid-300s, a dramatic shift occurred. Raised by his tutor Frumentius, a Syrian-turned bishop revered for spreading the faith, Ezana declared Christianity the state religion around 330. He constructed stone stelae, including one inscribed in Guizi, Greek, and Sabaean, commemorating his victory over the kingdom of Kush and his religious devotion. Ethiopia thus became one of the first Christian states, aligning itself spiritually and diplomatically with Byzantium and the broader Christian world. Aksum's architecture showcased both wealth and belief. Vast obelisks, such as the famous obelisk of Aksum, soared as funerary monuments and symbols of royal power. Churches, some built under Ezana and his successors, marked the religious transformation, with structures like Debre Damo and Mariam Sion emerging as spiritual centers. The Guizi script, originally derived from ancient South Arabian writing, evolved during this period into a sophisticated abugida used for holy scriptures and inscriptions. At its zenith, Aksum ruled territories stretching into the Nile region, Yemen, and the interior Sudanese lands. The kingdom's navy safeguarded control of Red Sea trade, ensuring its position among global powers. The obelisk of Ezana, the inscriptions mentioning conquests, and the Aksumite coinage all testify to a sophisticated, internationally respected polity. By the 7th century, however, Aksum began to decline. Factors contributing to its waning power included climate change, trade route realignments following the rise of Islam, and political fragmentation. While oral tradition speaks of a destructive queen named Gudit in the 10th century, the evidence remains unclear. Aksum would never regain its former dominance, but its cultural and religious legacy endured in later dynasties. By the late 12th century, the Solomonic claims of descent from King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba re-emerged under Yakuno Amlak. In around 1270, he overthrew the Zagwe rulers and founded the Solomonic dynasty. Legend states that the Queen of Sheba gave birth to Menelik I, who carried the Ark of the Covenant to Ethiopia, his descendants tracing their lineage back to biblical royalty. Though historically unverifiable, this narrative became fundamental to royal ideology and Ethiopia's identity. Yakuno Amlak secured external alliances through diplomacy and strategic gifts, possibly including giraffes sent to the Byzantine emperor. He also commissioned churches, establishing Ethiopian Orthodox statecraft that combined religious authority with imperial rule. His successors continued to build monumental rock-hewn churches, most notably those at Lalibela in the 13th century. These churches, carved into living rock, symbolized Jerusalem in stone and served as pilgrim centers. Their construction reflected a deeply intertwined vision of monarchy, piety, and architectural grandeur. The Solomonic emperors then faced recurring conflicts with neighboring Islamic sultanates in the Horn, such as Ifit and Adal, and negotiated occasional aid from Portugal. In the 16th century, the threat from Ahmad ibn Ibrahim al-Ghazi, dubbed Gragn, forced Ethiopia to seek assistance from the Portuguese under Prince Cristóvão da Gama. Portugal's military support helped repel the Sultanate's forces, but also introduced increased European influence. In 1896, the coronation of Menelik II marked Ethiopia's ascendance as a modern imperial power. Under his leadership, Ethiopia expanded dramatically to include Oromia, Sidama, and other regions, while resisting colonization. Menelik's crowning achievement came in 1896 at the Battle of Adwa. Ethiopian forces triumphed over Italy's invading army, armed with modern weaponry, securing a rare African victory over a European power and preserving Ethiopian independence. In the 20th century, Haile Selassie I embodied both the imperial Solomonic legacy and the modernizing aspirations of Ethiopia. Born Tafari Makoan in 1892, he became regent in 1916 and emperor in 1930 after the death of Empress Zuditu. He implemented the first constitution in 1931, abolished slavery in 1942, and presided over Ethiopia's entry into the League of Nations. Though deposed in 1974 amid domestic unrest and a military coup, the monarchy officially ended. His reign left a deep imprint on Ethiopia's national identity. Ethiopia's imperial lineage holds profound cultural, political, and religious significance. As Africans celebrating a uniquely uninterrupted line of rulers from antiquity, Ethiopia's kings saw themselves as guardians of an unbroken covenant with God and Solomon. Their legacy of church building, theological scholarship, military resilience, and cultural innovation has shaped Ethiopia's traditions and heritage. The Kanem, Bornu Empire stood as one of the longest-lasting and most influential Muslim dynasties in Central and Eastern Sahel, ruled by the Safawa dynasty from around 700 CE until the mid-19th century. Its origins trace back to the Zazzau, a powerful Saharan nomadic people, who, according to early Arabic geographers, controlled significant trade networks across what would later become Kanem. Around the 11th century, the ruling Dugua dynasty was replaced by the Safawa clan, who embraced Islam, marking a pivotal shift both religiously and politically for the emerging empire. The Safawa established their capital at Njimi and later moved it to Bornu after losing Kanem to the Bilala around 1380 CE. Throughout the centuries, despite such upheavals, the dynasty demonstrated remarkable resilience, adapting and surviving where others faltered. One of its most prominent rulers was Maidunima Dibalimi, flourished 1221 to 1259 CE, who initiated diplomatic efforts with North Africa, notably exchanging giraffes as royal gifts with the Hafsid dynasty, and reportedly organized a 7-year holy war extending across the Fezzan region. It was under his reign that Kanem, Bornu solidified itself as a trans-Saharan trading power, benefiting from salt mines and caravan routes that connected sub-Saharan Africa with Mediterranean markets. Centuries later, the reign of Idris Aluma, late 1600s, marked a golden age for Kanem, Bornu. His chief imam, Ahmad Ibn Farchua, chronicled Aluma's reforms, which included establishing Qadi courts to formalize Islamic legal processes and separating judicial functions from executive authority, a notably advanced innovation for the period. Aluma fortified Islamic identity throughout his realm. He built numerous brick mosques, sponsored pilgrimages to Mecca, and even created safe lodgings and date gardens for pilgrims. His contributions extended beyond religion. He cleared major trade routes, standardized grain measures, encouraged agricultural expansion, and introduced faster boats for Lake Chad navigation. In his own words, he wanted the empire's travel to be so secure that a lone woman clad in gold might walk with none to fear but God. Under Aluma's leadership, Kanem, Bornu not only reclaimed Kanem, but also stabilized internal strife, conquered rival tribes, and managed relationships with powerful neighbors, including the Bulala, Tuareg, and Hausa states. Trade thrived. Natron, ivory, kola nuts, leather, and slaves were exchanged for horses, salt, silk, and firearms from North Africa. By mid-16th century, the empire had fully recovered from earlier losses and stood as a regional powerhouse under a unified Islamic regime. Yet by the mid-19th century, the Safawa dynasty faltered amid renewed internal conflicts, external raids, and colonial encroachment. Bornu was overrun by Sudanese warlord Rabi Zubair from 1893 to 1900, only temporarily returning Safawa rule under British and French colonial terms in 1902. The dynasty formally ended in 1846, replaced by the new Al-Kanemi rulers under colonial oversight. Although the political empire collapsed, traditional emirates like Borno and Dikwa continue to this day in Nigeria, echoes of centuries-old authority. The legacy of the Kanem, Bornu Empire is manifold. Centuries of Islamic learning and jurisprudence, architectural innovation with brick mosques, a stabilized, trans-Saharan trade infrastructure, and a dynastic tradition that outlasted many early African states. It demonstrated advanced administrative, legal, military, and diplomatic capabilities across centuries, remaining a rare example of a resilient, multi-ethnic, Islamic monarchy in Central Africa. In a parallel sweep across the Sahel, the Hausa city-states, including Kano, Katsina, Gobir, Zaria, and others, thrived from the medieval period into early modern times under localized rulers known as Sarki. Though Islamic influence had reached them as early as the 15th century, local dynasties often blended pre-Islamic customs with Muslim law. The house estates were loosely connected through trade routes bringing scholars, goods, and culture from Mali, Songhai, and the broader Islamic world. By the late 18th century, the increasing corruption, syncretism, and despotic tendencies of these states were criticized by reformist thinkers. Among the most prominent was Usman Dan Fodio, born in 1754 in Gobir. A Fulani scholar, preacher, and mystic, he issued a call for Islamic reform, decrying tyrannical Hausa rulers who blended pagan rituals with Islamic facade. In 1804, he declared jihad, holy war, gathering Fulani herders, Hausa peasants, and disillusioned scholars to his cause. His forces defeated Gobir at Sunchua, secured victories in Kebbi and Katsina, and by 1808 captured Kano, Zaria, and Gobir. By 1809, he established the Sokoto Caliphate, proclaiming himself Emir al-Mu'minin, commander of the faithful. Though he soon retired to focus on scholarship, his son Muhammad Bello and brother Abdullahi Dan Fodio administered the Eastern and Western Emirates, respectively, through a decentralized federal system connecting over 30 emirates and governing as many as 10 to 20 million subjects, the largest independent polity in Africa of its time. Under their leadership, the Caliphate implemented legal and educational reforms rooted in Islamic law, Qadi courts, mutasibs, market inspectors, imams, and taxes such as carriage and jizya. Scholars, including women like Nana Asmiu, produced hundreds of treatises on law, theology, grammar, Sufism, medicine, and more. Institutions of learning flourished, Arabic, Hausa, and Fulfulde languages thrived, and Sufi brotherhoods expanded. This intellectual and administrative vitality earned Sokoto the reputation as the most prosperous region in tropical Africa. By 1837, the population had grown to over 20 million, including an estimated 1 to 2.5 million slaves, making Sokoto one of the largest slaveholding societies after the American South. Economically, the Caliphate thrived on agriculture, including plantations, internal trade, and Islamic taxes. The Sokoto Caliphate also influenced a chain of jihads across the western Sudanic region, laying foundations for Islamic states in Senegal, Mali, Ivory Coast, Sudan. Its model became a blueprint not only for religious reform, but also for Islamic governance and scholarship across West Africa. Despite its achievements, the Caliphate fell to British colonial conquest in 1903. Nevertheless, its spiritual and cultural legacy endures. Sultans remain influential, Sokoto teaches through Islamic schools, and Usman Dan Fodio's works continue to anchor religious and political discourse. Along the eastern edge of Africa, stretching from southern Somalia to northern Mozambique, a string of vibrant coastal cities emerged between the 11th and 15th centuries. These Swahili city-states grew from small Bantu-speaking fishing and farming communities into bustling maritime hubs, Kilwa, Mombasa, Lamu among the most prominent. Their prosperity was rooted in their role as intermediaries in the Indian Ocean trade, linking Africa's interior with Arabia, Persia, India, and beyond. While powerful trading partners hailed from the Arabian Peninsula and Persia, the Swahili cities developed distinct identities, forged through centuries of cultural fusion, embodying local African foundations, Islamic influence, and legends of foreign origin. The founders of many coastal polities, such as Kilwa, traced their lineage to Persia. Shirazi myths held that Persian royal families from Shiraz settled along the coast centuries before, founding towns like Kilwa Kisawani and Lamu. They claimed descent from legendary princes such as Ali ibn al-Hasan Shirazi, credited with acquiring Kilwa around the 10th century. Though recent genetic studies have shown that Asian sources contributed mainly through male ancestry dating back 1,000 years, the foundation myths served an important political purpose, legitimizing ruling elites by linking them to distant Islamic civilizations. These myths helped frame Swahili dynasties as both indigenous and cosmopolitan, reaffirming their status in Indian Ocean society. Yet the development of stone architecture along the Swahili coast was firmly an African innovation. Communities built mosques, tombs, and residences using coral rag and lime mortar. The oldest mosques, such as the one in Mombasa dating to the early 14th century, reveal local craftsmanship infused with Islamic aesthetics. Swahili architecture developed its own blend of Arabic calligraphy, decorative motifs, and indigenous techniques, giving coastal cities a unique built environment. Trade drove the rise of Swahili city-states. Merchants loaded local goods, gold from inland kingdoms, ivory, tortoiseshell, and slaves, onto dhows and sailed with monsoon winds to markets in Arabia, Persia, India, and China. In return, they imported textiles, spices, ceramics, glass beads, and metals. Coinage, an innovation introduced by Persian settlers, aided commerce. Kilwa minted its own coins, some even discovered as far afield as the Wessel Islands off Australia, signaling broad trading reach. In each city-state, a sultan, often claiming Shirazi descent, wielded authority over trade, taxation, and justice. Swahili elites identified themselves through Islamic titles and Swahili names, emphasizing both religious and regional ties. The trading economy supported a cosmopolitan population: Bantu Africans, Arabs, Persians, Indians, and others. Swahili language, enriched with Persian and Arabic loanwords, became the lingua franca of the coast. Kilwa Sultanate, centered on Kilwa Kisiwani and the mainland port of Kilwa Kavinji, was among the most powerful Swahili states from the 12th to 15th centuries. It controlled gold and ivory trade from the Zimbabwe Plateau deep inland. At its height, Kilwa's influence extended over most of the East African coast, from Mozambique to Malindi in Kenya. Its wealthy merchants used coir-stitched dhows, manned with expertly trained sailors who navigated by latitude staves, to dominate ocean trade. From the 16th century, Portuguese mariners entered the Indian Ocean, aiming to dominate its trade. Vasco da Gama reached the coast in 1498, and by about 1500 the Portuguese were attacking Swahili ports. They sacked Kilwa and Mombasa, erecting Fort Jesus in Mombasa by 1597. These attacks shattered Kilwa's authority and destabilized local economies. While Swahili rulers resisted, the military disparity proved decisive over time. In response, Omanis were invited to help expel the Portuguese. By the late 17th century, Omani forces defeated Portuguese garrisons, expelling them from Mombasa and Zanzibar by around 1698. Oman established influence over key coastal cities, installing governors and integrating them into its maritime empire, which soon eclipsed Persian influence. Cities like Mombasa, Lamu, and Kilwa came under indirect Omani control, their sultans becoming Qadis and Lawalis appointed by Muscat. Lamu preserved more autonomy, but shared in an economy now interwoven with clove-growing plantations and slave exports. Trade in slaves intensified to meet demands in Arabia, India, and plantations in the Indian Ocean islands. During the 18th and 19th centuries, Swahili cities became nodes in the trafficking of hundreds of thousands of enslaved people. Stone Town in Zanzibar became especially central. Arab elites from Oman and the Hadramaut established themselves, intermarrying with Swahili families to form a hybrid ruling class. Zanzibar was a launching point for caravans moving into the interior, collecting ivory, copal, gum, and slaves along trails reaching as far as Katanga and Nyasaland. When Said bin Sultan al-Busaidi moved his capital from Muscat to Zanzibar in around 1832, Stone Town became the capital of a wealthy empire. Clove plantations, introduced by Indian agronomists, later producing 90% of the global supply, redefined the island's economy. Slaves became the primary workforce for these plantations, harshly laboring under brutal conditions. Zanzibar developed significant infrastructure: palaces, forts, official residences, and residences for Indian traders. European travelers described Stone Town as cosmopolitan, with narrow streets thronged by people of many backgrounds. Markets offered spices, ivory, textiles, metalware, and slaves. Omani governance introduced customs duties and export taxes, channeling wealth into the royal court and merchant class. However, the slave-based economy became unsustainable under growing British pressure. The Frere Treaty of 1873 forbade export of slaves from mainland Africa to Zanzibar, closing its open slave market. Though the trade persisted clandestinely, the island's economy began shrinking. Infrastructure moved from slave systems to exports such as cloves, ivory, and copal. In 1890, the Heligoland, Zanzibar Treaty placed the island under British protection. In 1896, the Anglo-Zanzibar War, lasting under an hour, overthrew Khalid ibn Barghash in favor of the British-backed Hamid ibn Muhammad. The Sultan's role became largely symbolic. Slavery was formally abolished between 1897 and 1909, and Zanzibar's economy shifted toward legitimate cash crops, trade, tourism, and colonial subordination. In 1963, the Sultanate briefly regained independence and joined the Commonwealth. A successful socialist revolution in January 1964 deposed Sultan Jamshid bin Abdullah, ending centuries of monarchical rule. The formation of Tanzania followed in April 1964. The history of Swahili city-states and the Sultanate of Zanzibar illustrates a dynamic transformation. From small fishing town to cosmopolitan urban emporium, from Islamic self-rule to colonial puppet. Persian and Arab settlers interwove their stories with Bantu foundations, creating resilient coastal societies sustained by Indian Ocean trade. Portuguese aggression fractured older orders, but also triggered new Omani hegemony. Omani Zanzibar became a plantation-based slave society, later reshaped under British anti-slavery and colonial regimes. Today, Zanzibar's architecture, language, cuisine, and cultural heritage stand as living witnesses to centuries of Afro-Arab history, trade, spiritual exchange, and resistance on the Swahili coast. Great Zimbabwe rose in the 11th century in what is now southern Zimbabwe, built by the Shona-speaking people as the heart of a powerful kingdom. At its peak in the 14th century, it held around 10,000 inhabitants in its capital, a sprawling stone city with complex enclosures and walls constructed without mortar. These structures, created using an ingenious drystone technique, showcased exceptional engineering. Massive granite blocks fitted together precisely, forming defensive and ceremonial spaces, including the famed Great Enclosure, the Hill Complex, and the Valley Ruin. Atop the Hill Complex were the iconic Zimbabwe birds carved from soapstone, symbolic creatures likely representing royal or spiritual authority. Trade was the lifeblood of Great Zimbabwe. The kingdom sat near vast gold deposits and became the central node in inland, coast exchange networks. Archaeologists have uncovered glass beads from India, porcelain from China, and coins from Arabia among its ruins, indicating that its wealth flowed outward to trading partners such as the Swahili city-states of Kilwa and Sofala, and then overseas via Indian Ocean ships. Chicken and cattle herding also supported the population, with large herds tied to the king's power and status. By the mid-15th century, Great Zimbabwe's influence began to wane. Environmental pressures, including soil exhaustion and drying climate, plus disruption in trade routes and competition from emerging polities like Mapungubwe, weakened its foundations. The capital was abandoned, and attention turned to successor states. One successor was the Kingdom of Matapa, born out of the Great Zimbabwe polity. Its kings, including Nyatsimba Mutoda in the mid-15th century, moved into the Zambezi Valley, establishing a new capital and maintaining gold trade links. Meanwhile, farther south, the Rozwi Empire rose in the 17th century under Changamire leaders. They overthrew Matapa's control and built strongholds like Danangam, creating stone citadels reminiscent of Great Zimbabwe. The Rozwi, meaning plunderers, became a military power, controlling expansive territories and defending them using well-organized infantry. Their rule extended until the late 19th century, resisting European colonialism before eventually succumbing to British and Boer expansion. Across southern Africa, stone constructions served not just as urban infrastructure, but as symbols of centralized power. Great Zimbabwe, Matapa, and Rozwi leaders used these monuments to express authority, legitimacy, and sophistication, projecting the ruler's control, spiritual role, and ability to mobilize labor and resources. Beginning in the early 19th century in southeastern modern South Africa, the Zulu kingdom emerged as the region's most formidable military state under the leadership of Shaka Zulu, son of Senzangakona. Born in 1807, Shaka rose to power in 1816, rebuilding a fractured Zulu chiefdom into a centralized empire. He revolutionized warfare, introducing the Ikwa, a short stabbing spear, and innovative tactics such as the bull-horn formation that surrounded enemies. His regiments, organized by age grades Amabutho, were rigorously trained and disciplined, with failure punished severely. Even punishments extended to warriors' families if they faltered. Shaka expanded his realm through a series of brutal raids and diplomacy. His forces absorbed or scattered neighbors in what became known as the Mfikane or Difakane, the crushing or the scattering. Some estimates describe over 1 million deaths or displacements as rival chiefdoms collapsed under Zulu military pressure. Yet statecraft under Shaka also involved integrating conquered peoples and clans into Zulu military and social structures. If a chiefdom posed no threat, he was offered autonomy in return for tribute and loyalty, diplomacy that helped stabilize vast territories. Central to his power was ritual symbolism. Annual ceremonies such as the First Fruits Festival reinforced Shaka's spiritual link to cattle, land, and ancestors. His very person was sacred. Personal items like hair and nail clippings were protected with charms, inkata, believed to hold mystical power. Despite access to firearms via Portuguese and British traders at Delagoa Bay and Port Natal, Shaka resisted their dominance, arguing that a gunman could be overwhelmed by swift, disciplined spear warriors. In 1828, internal dissent rose. Following the death of his mother, Shaka imposed harsh purges on opponents. Two of his half-brothers, Dingain and Mlengana, assassinated him. Dingain inherited the throne but lacked Shaka's charisma and ambition. He faced increasing challenges, both internal and external. Dingain famously confronted Voortrekkers at the Battle of Blood River, 1838, where Zulu forces were defeated. Later, his brother Mpan took power with Boer assistance, fleeing and regrouping around European support. Mpan's rule was relatively stable, but after his death in 1856, succession disputes erupted. His sons Setshwayo and Mbiyazi waged civil war at Ndongo, resulting in Mbiyazi's faction's massacre and Setshwayo's dominance. Setshwayo reinstated traditional discipline and reformed military structures. Yet confrontation with the British culminated in the Anglo-Zulu War of 1879. Initially victorious at Isandlwana, the Zulu were eventually defeated by British firepower and logistics, ending the hegemony of Zulu independence. After annexation, the British deposed Setshwayo and installed compliant chiefs. Nevertheless, the Zulu royal line continued. Today, the Zulu royal house remains a powerful cultural institution, presided over by the current monarch, who holds significant symbolic importance and occasional political influence in modern South Africa. These southern African dynasties, Great Zimbabwe, Matapa/Razwi, and the Zulu, reflect a rich pattern of political, spiritual, and military innovation. Stone city-states and capitals symbolized centralized authority and spiritual sophistication. Trade linked the interior to the wider world, leveraging gold and ivory. The Zulu demonstrated how charismatic leadership, military reform, and cultural rituals could create a powerful, unified state in a landscape of fragmented polities. Though colonial conquest disrupted these kingdoms, their legacies, rituals, architecture, and descendants survive today, shaping national identity and collective memory across southern Africa. African history abounds with examples of powerful women whose political and military leadership challenged gender norms in profound ways. One of the most celebrated is a warrior queen from the mid-16th century, who ruled the house estate of Zazzau in what is now northern Nigeria. Born in approximately 1533 to the ruling family, she trained under her grandfather in martial skills, long before taking the throne, earning the title of heir apparent at age 16. When her brother ascended the throne, she served as a cavalry commander, leading troops in warfare. 3 months after becoming queen circa 1576, she launched military campaigns that spanned 34 years, expanding Zazzau's borders to include Nup, Bachi, and regions toward the Benue and Niger rivers. Leading an army estimated at 20,000 foot soldiers and 1,000 cavalry, she introduced protective armor and built fortified walls, some stretching 15 kilometers, around conquered towns. These achievements positioned Zazzau as a powerful commercial and political hub with control over regional trade routes in kola nuts, leather, gold, slaves, and salt. Her fierce leadership earned her respect as a woman, as capable as a man, and she remains one of Africa's most inspiring female figures. In southeastern Africa, another formidable queen emerged in the early 17th century in Ndongo, modern Angola. Born around 1583, she initially served as regent and diplomat under her brother. When Portuguese forces invaded and her brother died circa 1624, she took the throne, first as Queen of Ndongo, then as Queen of Matamba. She wielded both coercive power and diplomatic skill. Khoi allies included Dutch forces against the Portuguese. Deserted by male rulers opposed to a woman's rule, she survived repeated assaults by going into exile, rebuilding her power base in Matamba, and transforming it into a guerrilla state. She took the royal title Ngola, led troops in battle, and created a female warrior corps. At negotiation tables, she refused to accept subservient symbols. Once, when offered a mat instead of a chair by Portuguese officials, she sat on her servant to assert equality. Her tactics combined military resistance, diplomatic engagement, and strategic use of Christianity. Her reign challenged gendered norms profoundly. She embodied both masculine and feminine leadership styles, ruling as a warlord when necessary, wearing traditional feminine regalia at court, and reframing political structures to allow extended female succession. Between her death in 1663 and the 19th century, female monarchs reigned in her realm for 80 of 104 years, illustrating the enduring impact of her model. In the ancient kingdom of Nubia, titles such as Candace or Candake denoted ruling queens who exercised military authority against Roman incursions. Historical accounts and coins attest that these queens, such as Amina, who led a revolt around 1st century BCE, presided over armies and treaties. Their rule disrupted narratives that African states were purely patriarchal elites. Yet queenship in Africa extended far beyond these exceptions. In many kingdoms, royal women served as regents for underage heirs, wielded power behind the scenes, or managed important religious offices. In Buganda, modern Uganda, the queen mother and princess sister held significant ritual and political authority, controlling land, taxes, courts, and succession decisions. In Ethiopia, empresses and queen mothers served as kingmakers and advisors, influencing succession and legislation for centuries. In Luba and Lunda societies, priestesses and royal women conducted ancestral rituals essential for kingship. These women, whether ruling, advising, or safeguarding dynastic lines, show that female power in Africa was dynamic and diverse, rooted in spiritual beliefs, kinship systems, matrilineal customs, or imperial exigencies, reshaping political traditions across the continent. Colonial rule profoundly disrupted African royal systems in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. European powers dismantled kingdoms, deposed monarchs, redrew borders, and integrated royal structures into indirect rule systems. Some monarchs were co-opted as administrative chiefs to facilitate control. Others were exiled or executed. In Angola, the Portuguese removed queens like Ndongo Matamba's Veronica I from power. In the Kingdom of Buganda, British colonizers deposed King Mwanga II in 1872, exiled him, reinstated him later, then abolished the kingdom in 1966 during Uganda's Republican nationalist shift. Despite this, many royal institutions endured. After independence in the 1990s, several African nations, Uganda, Ghana, Nigeria, South Africa, Lesotho, restored traditional monarchies in ceremonial and cultural roles. In Buganda, the Kabaka, Queen Mother, and Royal Sister were reinstated in 1993 under President Museveni. In South Africa, the Zulu throne continues under a modern king who holds symbolic authority and participates in provincial politics. Nigerian Yoruba traditional rulers, including the Uni of Ife and Alafin of Oyo, wield influence through cultural patronage, conflict mediation, and community mobilization. Lesotho maintains a constitutional monarchy under King Letsie III. Swaziland, now Eswatini, may have Africa's only remaining absolute monarchy. These institutions function as custodians of heritage, moral guidance, and mediators between citizens and government. The survival of royal legacies ties closely to cultural identity. Emblems such as palaces, regalia, chieftaincy titles, rituals, music, and oral narratives form living heritage. UNESCO heritage sites like Great Zimbabwe and rock-hewn churches of Lalibela attest to dynastic artistry and architecture. Annual festivals, Buganda's Nkuka and Zulu's first fruits, mobilize communities around ritual renewal and collective memory. Royal ceremonies also serve tourism and economic development. In Zanzibar, the restored Sultanate Palace connects urban design and colonial post-colonial history for visitors. In Nigeria, attractions like Oyo's Palace, Uni's Tours, and Benin's Museum of Bronzes draw international attention, and sometimes provoke repatriation debates over looted artifacts. Yet challenges persist. Africa's monarchies navigate modernity, democratic values, and sometimes contested ethnic politics. They may be viewed as relics, especially where hereditary power conflicts with egalitarian ideals, or co-opted into local power contests. Attempts to expand roles beyond culture risk politicizing institutions not subject to electoral checks. undermining democratic governance. Still, in many societies, monarchs play pragmatic social and economic roles. They mobilize development funds, support education, mediate violence, and promote cultural tourism. Worth noting is Uganda's Queen Mother establishing social welfare programs for education and health. In the Zulu case, their king engages with provincial government and advocates for rural development and heritage preservation. African royal traditions of queenship and dynastic power remain vibrant, remarkable not only for surviving colonial suppression, but for adapting and gaining new relevance. Whether as symbols of national unity, cultural identity, tourism anchors, or moral leaders, monarchs continue shaping Africa's evolving political landscape. From the legendary warrior queens, whether in West Africa or Angola, to the constitutional kings of Uganda and ceremonial chiefs in South Africa, royal institutions coexist within multi-party democracies and globalization pressures. They stand as unique testaments to history's resilience, and a reminder that leadership in Africa was never defined solely by gender or written constitutions, but also by mythic power, sacred authority, and ancestral lineage. Across the vast and varied landscapes of Africa, the story of royalty is not just a chronicle of power and politics. It is a reflection of deep cultural roots, spiritual philosophies, and sophisticated systems of governance that predate and often surpassed many contemporaneous structures in other parts of the world. Reassessing Africa's royal legacy is not merely a historical task, but an act of restoration, restoring dignity, visibility, and intellectual weight to a tradition that colonial narratives deliberately marginalized or distorted. The dynasties of Africa, from the Kedas of Mali and the Solomonic emperors of Ethiopia to the Obus of Benin and the Kabakas of Uganda, present a compelling counterpoint to outdated views that Africa lacked organized governance before colonization. These monarchs presided over complex legal systems, robust trade networks, and dynamic diplomatic relations. Many kings and queens were not only political figures, but also spiritual leaders who drew their legitimacy from divine sanction, ancestral connection, or sacred rituals. In this way, the idea of kingship in Africa transcended mere political control. It wove together religion, culture, identity, and law into a unified whole. From pre-colonial times, African rulers demonstrated remarkable acumen in statecraft and diplomacy. Kings like Mansa Musa elevated Mali into one of the most cosmopolitan and prosperous empires of the medieval world, while emperors like Menelik II successfully defended Ethiopian sovereignty against colonial aggression at the Battle of Adwa. The structure of governance across these kingdoms often included advisory councils, checks on royal authority, provincial governors, and complex succession rules, whether matrilineal or patrilineal, showcasing political maturity. In Kanem-Bornu, the administrative reforms under Idris Aluma rivaled the innovations of European contemporaries, and the Swahili coast's maritime diplomacy connected Africa with Persia, Arabia, India, and China long before European colonization. These legacies are not buried in the past. Despite colonial dismantling, royal institutions endure in both symbolic and practical forms. In places like Nigeria, Uganda, Ghana, and South Africa, monarchs continue to play roles in conflict mediation, cultural preservation, and community mobilization. The presence of surviving royal courts, palaces, and ceremonies underscores the ongoing relevance of these lineages in shaping identity and heritage. The emotional and cultural connection many African communities maintain with their royal institutions reveals a living tradition, not just a historical relic. However, public understanding of these legacies often remains limited, particularly outside Africa. Colonial and post-colonial education systems tended to emphasize European models of governance while relegating African polities to the margins of global history. Even within Africa, urbanization, globalization, and political change sometimes weaken links to traditional authority. This makes the role of historians, educators, artists, and cultural institutions all the more vital. Documenting oral histories, preserving palace architecture, supporting traditional festivals, and promoting scholarship on African political thought can help reintegrate royal traditions into mainstream understanding of global civilization. The study of Africa's royal past teaches us that governance, legitimacy, and leadership have always taken many forms. These dynasties remind us that Africa was, and continues to be, a continent of great complexity, dignity, and innovation. By deepening awareness and scholarship on these legacies, we not only reclaim history, but also enrich the present.